In this episode, we take up the Menagerie, Part 2.
Compliance, the final frontier. Tom Fox is the voyager of trekking through compliance. His mission? To explore the original series and seek out and share what it can teach you about compliance. Here's your host, Tom Fox.
The Menagerie, Part 2, Stardate 3012.4. In Part 2, the tape recording show continues and it shows Pike confined to a cell. He discovers that the Telosians are illusionists capable of making a man see anything they wish him to see, and telepaths who can communicate without speaking. The Telosians wish Pike to remain on the planet as Venus' mate. Meanwhile, the crew of the Enterprise beams the ship's power down to the surface in a fruitless attempt to blast through the mountain where the Telosians seem to disappear with Pike. However, this had no effect, and the Telosians continue their mind games with Pike. The Telosians reenact Pike's encounter on Rigel 7 in his head, but they add Vina. In this enactment, Pike kills the beast who is attacking them and then is returned to his cell with Vina. Vina tells him that the Telosians retreated underground after a war 2,000 years ago and have developed stunning mental powers. She also reveals that she is a real human and not an illusion. Pike discovers that the Telosians cannot penetrate primitive, strong emotions with their telepathy. The next virtual reality trip for Pike and Vina is at Pike's farm on Earth, complete with his horse Tango. As Pike uses this opportunity to scheme, Vina has the Telosians shift venues to a Roman court, with Vina playing a part of a Green Orion dancing slave girl. Again, Pike does not cooperate. Meanwhile, a landing party of 6 from the Enterprise beams down in an attempt to find Pike, but only number 1 and a female yeoman actually arrive. The Telosians now give Pike a selection of specimens for starting a human community of slaves. Instead, Pike uses the phasers brought down by the landing party as bait and captures one of the Telosians as he tries to recover them from a sliding panel in the side of his cell. Pike fires one of the phasers through the wall, seeing no effect, but forces a Telosian to show him the hole which was produced or else have the non-functional phaser tested on his head. Pike and the women escape to the surface, but it turns out that it was actually the first part of the Telosians' plan to repopulate the surface. The Telosians learn of Pike and humankind's unshakable hatred of captivity, and this forces them to let the Enterprise crew go, as the humans appear too violent a species for their need. Before Pike leaves, he discovers that Venus' beauty is illusional, as she is actually severely deformed in the Columbia's crash and as she was put back together by the Telosians. All of this is viewed by the court-martial committee on the Enterprise. However, when the tape is complete, Mendez disappears, and it turns out he was an illusion used to distract Kirk from regaining control of the Enterprise. Kirk with the authorization of Star Trek, who have also been viewing the images from Talos 4, permit the now disfigured Pike to transport to Talos 4. All charges against Spock are dropped, and the Enterprise continues on its way. Kirk speaks to Spock about a tendency towards flagrant emotionalism, but Spock quips, "I see no reason to insult me, sir. I've been completely logical about the whole affair." So, what's the fun fact for today's episode? That Parts 1 and 2 of The Menagerie won the 1967 Hugo Award for the Best Dramatic Presentation. In Part 1, we focused on the human slavery angle to this episode, but now I'd like to maybe ask you to think about what's your process for various things in compliance. And although this may not seem like a process episode, there really are lots of processes that go on here. And I'd like you to think about what happens after Captain Pike is captured and how the crew tries to blast him out of the Telosians' castle or fortress, whatever you may want to call it. They begin with simple hand phasers to try to blast the door open, and that doesn't work. And then they bring down a phaser cannon to the surface of the planet and then try to use that. At that point, that fails as well, And of course, that's when the Telosians start playing their mind games, literally, to make the Enterprise crew voluntarily or by hook, nook, or crook be captured, and that, of course, happens. But also the process by which Pike goes through to try to determine where he is and the power that the Telosians have in him. Whether you think of it as a pilot, I've done A, I've done B, I've done C, I've done E, D, E, and none of them has worked. What do you suggest now? Think about those steps for your compliance program, because my process wife engineer continually reminds me that having a process in place allows you to have more clarity when things get going rough or it all hits the fan and you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. But if you have a process, you know what to do and what to follow. Jonathan Marks also talks about having a process, but he talks about it in disaster planning. So when you truly do have a disaster, what's your plan? Who are you going to contact? Who's on your key team? And a wide variety of other factors that you might not think of. And unfortunately, the best example most recently is in Uvalde, where the Uvalde Police Department had been trained on an active shooter in an elementary school, had gone through the training, state training, knew all the steps, had it in writing, and completely fouled up and didn't follow really any of those because they got so caught up in the moment and literally terrified that they couldn't execute. So having a plan in place, and as Jonathan Marks reminds us, practicing that plan or process or protocol will help you if you find yourself in a true emergency like the crew of the Enterprise. Yesterday, we looked at some of the ethical lessons from the Menagerie, focusing on part 1. And part 2, I want to use it as an exploration of some of the compliance lessons because it offers several important compliance lessons worth exploring. Number 1, data privacy and confidentiality. The episode reveals that Captain Pike's medical records and personal information have been accessed and shared without his consent. This highlights the critical importance of robust data privacy and confidentiality controls within an overall compliance regime. Companies must ensure that sensitive personal data is properly protected and only accessed by authorized individuals. 2, unauthorized access and information security. The fact that the Telosians are able to breach Starfleet's systems and obtain Captain Pike's medical information underscores the need for strong information security measures. Compliance frameworks should address access controls, network security, and incident response protocols to mitigate the risks of unauthorized access and data breaches. Number 3, regulatory compliance and oversight. The episode suggests a potential lack of regulatory oversight and compliance with relevant Starfleet protocols and procedures. Compliance professionals should emphasize the importance of adhering to not only regulations and industry standards, but also internal policies and procedures to ensure organizational accountability and transparency. Number 4, whistleblowing and internal reporting. Mr. Spock's decision to risk his career to reveal the truth about Captain Pike's situation highlights the importance of effective whistleblowing and internal reporting channels. Compliance programs must have clear, well-written, and well-communicated processes to encourage the reporting of suspected wrongdoing and to protect individuals who come forward. Number 5, conflict of interest management. This episode presents a situation where Spock's personal loyalties and desire to help Captain Pike conflict with his professional duties and obligations. Compliance programs should establish robust conflict of interest policies and procedures to help navigate such ethical dilemmas. And number 6, business continuity and succession planning. This episode focuses on Captain Pike's incapacitation, and it raises questions that business continuity and succession planning should consider. Compliance professionals should ensure that organizations have appropriate contingency plans and clearly drafted roles and responsibilities to ensure the continuity of operations in the event of leadership transactions or unexpected events around leadership. For instance, the Citgo 6. By learning from the compliance-related lessons from the Menagerie, coupled with the ethical lessons we looked at the last podcast, organizations can strengthen their data privacy and security controls, regulatory and internal compliance, as well as conflict of interest management, business continuity, and ultimately enhancing your overall compliance posture within your organization and your business resiliency going forward. I hope you will join me again tomorrow where we take up our next episode, The Conscience of a King.
If you enjoyed this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, you can help it grow by sharing it with the biggest Trek fan you know.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.